I was a little boy in Brooklyn who was having a hard time. I was bullied by the neighborhood kids and my own father, a former New York City cop and a gun nut, who believed that men were thus and so, and women were thus and so, and they were to be interacting with each other in a very old-fashioned way, and children were to behave in a certain way also, particularly boys. And my experience with MAD dovetails precisely at the age of 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 with my understanding how different I am culturally from that, and that I'll be damned if I become like the people I see around me.
I loved anything with pages and pictures and words, and Mad was really part of that mix.
I was always attracted to Mad. The first issue that I saw, I fell in love with it. Just couldn't believe that grown men were being paid to do this.
I probably pilfered a lot of my brother's Mad magazines.
But my mother wouldn't let her grandson, my nephew, read Mad magazine.
You know, sneak into the drugstore and read them there.
We were just nerds, you know. And while other people would like try to get out of that category, we just reveled in it. We loved it.
That Mad snark definitely embedded into my DNA funny bone.
MAD was giving me courage. Jaffee, Dave Berg, Don Martin, Sergio, all of them were giving me license.
They talked about issues nobody talked about. Not even our parents, not the people in the news. You know, God knows, not politicians.
There are other ways of living. You can actually be critical.
Mad magazine was right in your face with a nice stinging pie to hit you right in the face.
And then after a few issues, I thought, I don't want to read this. I want to write this.
There's a funny little fella who you all know. He can cheer you up when you're feeling low. With his funny little grin from ear to ear, he'll make your troubles disappear. What we worry, I don't even care. What we worry, worrying can't get you anywhere.
Fancy magazines would only accept submissions from an agent. And then in the back of the book, they had a list of magazines that would read anybody's submission. And fortunately, Mad was on that list. The book had said, enclose a self-addressed stamped envelope, otherwise, if it's rejected, they'll throw it away. So several weeks later, my own envelope came back, and I was very depressed. And then I thought, well, maybe it will say, try again. And I opened the envelope, and it was stuffed with cardboard. And I slid it out, and the cardboard said, ha, 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 thought this was your script being returned. Stapled to this cardboard is a check for $100. And please call us. We'd like you to write more for us. And it was signed by Nick Meglin, who was associate editor back then. It was like a mad beginning, so it was a wonderful way to start. Nick had a silly edge to him where I think John was very good at when this was due by, what it might look like.
I like to think that we really complimented each other when we got in the comedy trenches, you know, and when, okay, we need an idea by today. And it's just me and Nick sitting in that room, you know, until something came out.
I'd go to an advertising agency and a creative director would look at the work and say, well, you should go to Mad.
And I threw out Sam's name.
Out of the blue, at the end of 1980, right around Thanksgiving, I got a call from Al Feldstein, the editor.
And then when we needed an art director, I suggested Sam's name, and he came in and interviewed. And that was really a turning point for Mad, because Sam has, besides being a very gifted artist, he's very good on the technical end.
Do you think I'd be better as an art director than I was as an illustrator? Definitely. Okay, let me think about it.
Mad was just starting to go into the computer age in a big way. He was a natural for that sort of thing. And he's very good with talent relations. Sam and I got to the point where very, very shorthand discussions of things. You know, we would sit and I'd say, I'm thinking about this for a cover. and I only had to give him just the broadest of strokes, and he would be sitting there drawing it, you know, and we just worked really, really well together. Very simpatico.
I'm a cartoonist. I don't consider myself an artist. But it was this lovely gallery exhibit close to us in Cohoes, and that's where I met John Caldwell. And I recognized his work, and he really just took me under his wing. And he sent me some Mad magazines, and I was like, I can do this, which there's a whole lot that I can't do, but I was like, I can make up stuff. And thus started my whole thing with Mad. And he taught me about gag cartooning. I'm hoping he's part of this exhibit. Because he's going to put me in an accident on the way home if he's not.
We were doing the 60 Minutes interview, and Wally Wood asked, what's the hardest part of publishing Mad? Dick said, stapling it.
John was like the backbone of Mad, and Sam Viviano was like the pancreas.
The pancreas, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair assessment.
And some of the intestine.
Yeah.
But we don't like to talk about that. No, we work well together, especially apart.
I will admit that I didn't really feel like a part of the usual gang until 1987, and I got my first invitation to go on a Mad trip.
We always thought of Bill as our father. On Mad, the Mad trips was a way for Bill to share money from Mad specials.
He created the perfect atmosphere for creativity to flourish.
We were in an interview, and the interviewer said to Bill, "Now you're a genius." And Bill said, "No, I am not a genius. If I have done anything to make Mad successful, it is to give artists and writers an atmosphere in which to thrive."
The history of Mad begins with the invention of the comic book in the 1930s by Max Gaines. He left his comic book empire to his son Bill. His main editor at the time was a guy named Al Feldstein. They brought in new artists, new writers, and one was a young fellow named Harvey Kurtzman, who's a journeyman cartoonist, and he came up with the idea for tales calculated to drive you mad. And this was Mad Comics, and it didn't do particularly well at first. The fourth issue, Harvey struck pay dirt. DC Comics, Superman. Super Duper Man in issue number 4 just sold off the racks.
I just love classic cartoons. So anybody who made fun of Superman, come on, that's just hysterical. Or Batman, you know, or Robin. And Undergrounds kind of came exactly from that.
But Harvey really didn't have his heart in being the editor of a comic book. Why can't Mad be a magazine? That would be even better. And the comic book industry was starting to hit some really tough times now at that point. The entire industry was falling apart, so he said, look, why not? So with issue number 24, Mad became a magazine. Another publisher who was very fond of comic strips and admired what Harvey was doing with Mad said, you know, if you ever leave Bill Gaines, come to me. That publisher was Hugh Hefner. And Harvey blinked and he left. Mad only had like 5 issues, 6 issues at this point. But he had no editor, no writer, and almost no artist. What does he do? He calls up Al Feldstein. He had to rebuild this magazine from scratch. Al Jaffee came to Feldstein with an idea for a cheap black and white fold-in. In 1964, the first fold-in appeared, and that's really where I tend to say that's when Mad gelled and became the magazine that we all think of, because it had the fold-in, it had Sergio Aragonés Mad Look-Ats and Marginals, it had Spy versus Spy, movie parodies, TV parodies.
Alfred E. Newman is the bigger dunce. He's stupider than the president and the advertisers, but he also perhaps therefore relates to their lying, cheating, and stealing, and understands that I may be dumb, but I see you.
One of the interesting things we learned in researching for the Mad magazine exhibition was that Norman Rockwell had been solicited by Mad to create a definitive portrait of Alfred E. Newman. The first actually came on July 1st, 1964, basically said, "It was indeed a pleasure for both Al Feldstein and myself to talk with you yesterday about the Alfred E. Neuman project. As per your request, we are enclosing some material on our little idiot boy. There should be enough here to allow you to cut up and shift around the elements as per our discussion concerning the distortions inherent in the present version of Alfred." The material that was sent to Rockwell was this print, which was typically handed out to Mad fans. And it says, "What me worry?" Later, about a week after John Putnam's letter came, Al Feldstein actually wrote to Rockwell on July 10th of 1964. And he said, "As per our telephone conversation this date, please consider this letter our firm commitment to purchase from you a charcoal portrait of your interpretation of Mad's trademark boy, Alfred E. Neuman, for $1,000, and that if we are pleased with the charcoal rendering of this more realistic and definitive Alfred, you will complete a full-color oil painting of the same for an additional $2,000. Rockwell was surely pleased to have received the request for the commission, but ultimately he decided to decline. In 1963, Rockwell left the Saturday Evening Post after 47 years and moved on to work for Look magazine, which was a more journalistic publication focusing on issues of race and on the space race and other significant themes in American culture. His response came fairly quickly in a short letter written to John Putnam, and Rockwell said, "Dear Mr. Putnam, I'm scared. I think I better back out of this one. After talking with you and my wife, who has a lot more common sense than I have, I feel that making a more realistic, definitive portrait just wouldn't do. I hate to be a quitter, but I'm afraid we would all get in a mess. Sincerely, Norman Rockwell."
Alfred E. Neuman has no story. It was a trademark, the way Mickey Mouse was a trademark.
Or the Playboy Bunny.
Yeah.
Or Esky for Esquire.
It must be exactly the same, and everything else can change.
Phony ads go all the way back to Harvey Kurtzman. This sets a tone for Mad in which you have an ad that looks just like the real thing, except, the copy is off and the photographs are off.
Spy vs. Spy was hugely important to me, but I don't think I recognized how much so until I tried to draw it. And when I did, I was like, this may be one of the main reasons why I started being interested in wordless comics. And one way is incredible simplicity to it in the storytelling, and yet the design of the characters was completely nutty. Like, are they birds? What is that, their nose? Where is that coming from? Like, no one had drawn a face like that.
Bill was significant, and when he died in '92, there was a void. Not only because nobody could fill Bill's shoes, but he didn't leave any plan of action.
There actually was a bidding war between two divisions of Time Warner as to who would get us. One was DC Comics and one was Time. And depending on which side you're on, you could argue that DC Comics lost because they got mad.
The DC period still continues. Nick retired in 2004. So from 2004 to 2017, John, who had been co-editor for 20 years, became sole editor-in-chief.
We had to play by tighter rules than we were playing with before, but by the same token, they had to appreciate that they never had anybody like us working for them, even though they were putting out comic books. And you look at Mad, you look at a comic book and say, oh, it's the same thing. Well, no, it's two different animals.
DC Comics had made a decision when there was a change of administration to move to Burbank, California. By 2017, they decided Mad should join them. So at the end of 2017, the New York office is closed.
So you want Burbank, you want Manhattan. Everybody chose Manhattan, so that's why the magazine went out with a new staff.
I'm the art director, creative director, custodian of all things Mad since 2018. I got the job when the Mad offices moved from New York to the West Coast, to Burbank, and Alfred E. Newman's been my boss for the past 7 years, so what me worry?
Doing comics is so complicated. I mean, it's so ironic that for so long it was considered low art, considering that in fact it's one of the most difficult art forms. For years, comics, it was easier to say they're for kids. I can't figure out where I'm supposed to look and all that because there's actually, you have to be comic literate.
It was the idea that your intellect and your intelligence and your desire to find out what things really mean. That's what we were all searching for. We have to deal with everything, and everything has a cost. Mad Magazine was right there, and God knows people hated them for that.
Well, I think great satire is when you're hoisting somebody on their own petard, you know, really exposing the hypocrisy of it.
To make fun of everyone, regardless of whether you're punching up or punching down. And I think the rule should be never to punch down.
Prided ourselves of trying to be on the sides of the angels at all time. And back then, very few people were doing that. And we were taking shots at both sides. You know, if a Democrat or Republican said something stupid, it didn't matter. Even if a product we liked came out with a stupid ad campaign, we went after it. It's what we were an equal opportunity offender.
Mad took strong stands on cigarette smoking, on the Vietnam War, on Watergate.
Ample targets on Wall Street and in Hollywood and in Washington to keep us plenty busy, and that's punching up. And that should be the thing we do all the time.
We try to mirror society.
The division and the separation of our own country, I think there's so much being said through cartoons.
And right now, it's a pretty ugly mirror.
When everything seems so scary. A way of having camaraderie.
Mad is an extremely important, not just publication, but movement in America and American cultural history.
It also crosses all language barriers.
I think now more than ever, this Mad tone and attitude needs to be introduced to new generations who are increasingly subjected to, you know, this 24-hour news cycle, you know, AI-generated images, like everything should be put into question at this point. Seeing things now through the Mad lens is more important now, today, than it ever has been before.
And I think it's a great lesson for kids. Art is your way out if you take it. If it talks to you, survival for kids is more urgent today than ever. And I hope that they get that when they come to this show. I think this show is most important for kids to see, not just the old timers like me who will have a kind of a nostalgic experience, but the kids to say, yes, I've been through that. I know what that is. I want to do something like that too.